There are visions that strengthen a soul and others that shatter it. Padre Pio, the humble friar from Petrol, China, had seen both. He had seen angels, the Virgin, and the wounds of Christ carved into his own flesh. But there was one vision he never spoke of without trembling. It was not a miracle, it was a warning. In that vision, God allowed him to witness what happens to a soul that dies in mortal sin, a sight so dreadful that afterward even his closest brothers said they had never seen his face so pale, his voice so heavy, his silence so absolute. Before we enter that story, take a moment to write in the comments where you're watching from, your city and country, and subscribe to this channel to walk with us through more true stories of the saints. Each one reveals not superstition, but the reality of heaven, hell, and the eternal stakes of every human choice. Padre Pio's vision is not folklore. It is a cry from the heart of divine mercy, a cry meant for our generation which has forgotten both sin and eternity. It happened late one night in the friary of San Giovanni Rotondo. The air was still outside. A cold wind blew through the mountains of southern Italy. Padre Pio was praying before the crucifix, as he often did, his rosary slipping through trembling fingers. The friars had long gone to sleep, but one brother later said he heard a sudden cry, sharp, terrified, and cut short. When he ran to Pio's cell, he found the saint collapsed on the floor, drenched in sweat, his eyes open but unseeing. For hours he could not speak. When at last he did, his words were few. "If men could see what I have seen tonight, they would never sin again." The friars begged him to explain, but he refused. Only years later, under obedience to his superior, did Padre Pio reveal fragments of that night. He said that during prayer, he was lifted into a vision, not of heaven, nor of purgatory, but of a single soul at the moment of death, standing before God in the state of mortal sin. What he saw was not a metaphor, but a reality unveiled. The soul, he said, fell into itself as if swallowed by its own darkness. He described the instant when grace withdrew, not because God ceased to love, but because the soul itself had refused love until the end. God does not cast a soul into hell. Pio said, the soul throws itself there. In his vision, he saw that soul surrounded by light for a final moment, yet it turned away, preferring the shadows it had chosen in life. Then came a fall, silent, endless, absolute. It was not fire, he said, but separation. Those who heard him speak said that his eyes filled with tears when he spoke of that separation. The greatest pain, he whispered, is to see love and to hate it. Padre Pio's vision shattered every sentimental notion of sin. He saw that mortal sin is not merely breaking a law, it is tearing one's heart from the very source of life. The sinner dies twice, once in body, once in soul. That night changed how he preached, how he heard confessions, how he wept. From that day on, his homilies became urgent, almost trembling with compassion. Do not wait for tomorrow, he told his spiritual children. Tomorrow is not yours. Today you can return to grace. Tomorrow you may meet eternity. He no longer spoke of hell as a threat, but as a wound self-inflicted by pride and indifference. We make our eternity, he said, with the choices we make each day. To understand why that vision broke him, we must remember what mortal sin truly is. The Catechism of the Catholic Church defines it as a deliberate choice to turn away from God in a grave matter, done with full knowledge and consent. It kills the life of grace in the soul, the supernatural friendship with God that begins at baptism. Padre Pio saw the full consequence of that death. He saw a soul stripped of grace, unable to love, unable to hope, unable to pray. That sight, he said, is worse than any torture. It was after that night that he began spending even longer hours in the confessional. For him, confession was not routine, it was rescue. He often said that a priest should tremble before the confessional door, for he stands between heaven and hell. Witnesses recall how Pio would sometimes cry after absolving a penitent. "I have seen too many souls on the edge." He said, "One more confession can save eternity." The friars who lived with him said that, even when exhausted, he refused to stop hearing confessions. "My sons," he told them, "hell is full of those who meant to confess tomorrow." The vision did not leave him untouched. He carried it like a wound in the soul, hidden beneath his stigmata. Those who knew him best noticed that he prayed differently. Afterward, he no longer prayed only for sinners in general, but for specific souls, those dying at that very hour without repentance. He offered his suffering, his pain, and his sleepless nights for them. If only one could be saved, he said, it would be worth every thorn. The friars later testified that some nights they would hear him whisper, through tears, "My Jesus, let none be lost tonight." In the days that followed the vision, the friars noticed a profound silence in Padre Pio. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the gravity of eternity. He had seen something that human language could barely touch. "We do not know what we risk," he told one brother quietly. "One mortal sin, unconfessed, unrepented. It is enough to undo creation within a single soul." From that moment on, he became a man haunted not by fear, but by compassion, the kind that bleeds. He began to preach about confess, Sion, with a force that startled even his closest followers. Crowds traveled for days to hear him. They came curious and left, trembling. Pio did not flatter. He spoke as one who had seen the edge of eternity. If men could see what one sin does to the soul, he said they would weep more than if they had lost the world itself. The people of San Giovanni called him the confessor of souls, but among the friars he was known as the weeper of souls. His compassion, however, was never sentimental. He warned against presumption as fiercely as against despair. "Do not say God will forgive me later," he cried from the pulpit. "That is the lie that builds hell." Yet he also assured the broken that no sin was beyond mercy. "If only you knew," he once told a penitent, "how quickly God runs to meet a soul that confesses sincerely." That balance, justice and mercy, truth and tenderness, became the mark of his ministry. It was not only the penitent who trembled in his confessional. Padre Pio himself suffered each time he absolved. Many nights after hearing confessions, his stigmata bled anew. The pain, he said, was the price of seeing what sin does to the heart of Christ. One friar testified that Pio once emerged from the confessional pale and exhausted, whispering the blood of souls stains deeper than wounds. When asked what he meant, he replied, "Every absolution is paid for by love." His vision gave him an almost prophetic sensitivity to souls near death. There were moments when he would suddenly stop, bow his head, and murmur a prayer. Later, news would arrive that someone had died that very hour. "Do not think death is far," he said once. "It follows us quietly like a shadow. Blessed is he who reconciles before it overtakes him." He often begged people to pray for the dying, especially those without confession. One Hail Mary, he said, can rescue a soul at the gate of despair. Theologic. Alle Padre Pio's experience confirmed what the Church has always taught. Mortal sin is the deliberate rupture of friendship with God. It extinguishes sanctifying grace, the divine life within us. The soul still exists, but cut off from light, it suffers the torment of its own emptiness. Pio saw that reality not as doctrine on a page, but as fire in vision. He once told a theologian who questioned him, "Dogma is light, vision is flame. Both are true, but flame consumes." His vision also gave him a profound horror of indifference. The devil's masterpiece, he said, is not violence, but indifference. He saw that most souls were not damned by hatred of God, but by neglect, by living as if he did not matter. They do not curse him, Pio said. They forget him. This forgetfulness, he warned, is the cold wind that leads to mortal sin. In every sermon thereafter, he pleaded, "Remember, eternity, you will live forever." But where it was not hell's fire that broke him, but its silence. In his vision, he said, the soul's cries were not screams of pain, but of absence. There was no hatred louder than the sound of nothing, he told a confessor. That emptiness and the eternal echo of rejection left him sleepless for nights. He prayed, "My God, let me suffer here so they may not suffer there." The friars heard him, weeping through the walls. One wrote in his diary, "Our Father Pio wrestles nightly with eternity. Those who met him after that time often said that his eyes seemed to see more than others, as if they pierced through the body into the soul. Once, while blessing a visitor, he suddenly said, 'Do not play with grace, my son. Death will not wait for your comfort.'" The man later returned shaken. That day, he said, "I went to confession for the first time in 20 years. Padre Pio's gift was not clairvoyance, it was compassion sharpened by vision. He saw the danger of sin and could not bear see. Lents, the story of that vision spread slowly through the monastery, and though he rarely spoke of it again, its shadow hung over his life. It became the secret fire behind his ministry. To outsiders, Padre Pio was the miracle worker, the stigmatist, the confessor of nations. But to those who knew him best, he was the man who had seen a soul fall and never recovered from it. They said that every time he raised the host, his hands trembled as if he remembered that night, when light and darkness met and one soul chose darkness. The more Padre Pio meditated on that vision, the more his prayer life changed. His nights became vigils. His rosary became a weapon. His tears became his ministry. He began to offer every mass, every drop of blood, from his wounds for souls on the edge of damnation. Worst tragedy, he said, is not that men sin, it is that they no longer care. To him, sin was not only a moral failure, but a blindness, a fog that numbs the conscience. The devil's greatest trick, he warned, is convincing souls that they have time. His devotion to confession reached supernatural intensity. Witnesses recounted how he would spend up to 18 hours a day hearing penitents, refusing rest even when feverish or bleeding. "I cannot sleep," he said. Souls are drowning. One friar once begged him to stop, fearing he might die from exhaustion. Padre Pio smiled and whispered, "Better to die, saving souls than to die sleeping." Saw every confession as a soul pulled from the abyss he had witnessed. Each absolution was an act of warfare. Those who confessed to him often felt something beyond human empathy, a weight lifted, a peace too deep to explain. But for Padre Pio, the grace that freed others came with a cost. After certain confessions, he would retreat to his cell and weep for hours. The mercy of God is infinite, he said, but sin wounds the heart of Christ deeper than the nails. His weeping was not despair. It was participation in the divine sorrow. He carried in his soul what theologians call compassio Christi, the shared suffering of the Redeemer. The vision also made him a fierce intercessor for the dying. He begged his followers to pray the chaplet of divine mercy and the rosary for souls in their final moments. The battle for eternity, he said, is often fought in the last breath. He claimed that at the hour of death, the devil tempts the soul with despair, convincing it that forgiveness is impossible. One act of trust can destroy that lie, he told his spiritual children, but only if the soul has learned to trust before dying. Padre Pio also warned of false security, the presumption that a good heart was enough for salvation. Many say, I harm no one. I am kind, he said, but kindness without grace cannot save. For him, salvation was not moralism, but relationship. To live in mortal sin, he said, is to tell God, I prefer myself to you. The saints, he taught, do not reach heaven by perfection, but by repentance. Heaven is full of sinners who confessed. He said, hell is full of those who excuse themselves. One night, years after the vision, a young friar found Padre Pio praying in the chapel long past midnight. The candles had melted low, and the air smelled of wax and incense. The friar hesitated, then asked, Padre, why do you pray so much for souls who will not change? Pio looked at him with tears and said, because Christ did. That simple answer revealed everything. He was not driven by fear of hell, but by love for the crucified, the one who descended even there to call the lost. Theologically, Pio's experience mirrors what Saint Catherine of Siena once wrote, the greatest suffering of the damned is the loss of my mercy, which they despised in life. Both saints saw that hell is not primarily punishment from God, but final consequence of rejecting love. The fire is love itself, resisted. Padre Pio's horror, therefore, was not of God's wrath, but of love unaccepted. If love were not eternal, he said, hell would cease to exist. That paradox haunted him, that even in judgment, God remains love. From that understanding came his deepest compassion. He never looked at a sinner with contempt. Instead, he looked at them as someone standing on the edge of an invisible cliff. Every soul, he said, is one confession away from heaven or from hell. That awareness made him patient with weakness, but merciless toward indifference. God forgives everything, he would repeat, but only when asked. Ask before it is too late. As the years passed, that vision became a silent companion in his suffering. When his stigmata burned, when slander and suspicion surrounded him, when he faced the dark nights of spiritual dryness, he united it all with the souls he had seen falling. If my pain can hold one back from the abyss, he said, then let it never end. For him, suffering was not punishment, but currency, the coin of redemption. Each wound, each sleepless night was an offering to keep others from eternal loss. One evening, after Mass, a friar overheard him, whispering before the tabernacle, My Jesus, do not let another fall tonight. Take my rest, take my breath, take my life, but save them. It was not rhetoric. It was the language of a man who had seen the invisible and refused to turn away. Those who saw him that night said his face shone faintly, not with glory, but with exhaustion, sanctified. He had become what he prayed, for a bridge between mercy and misery, The vision that broke him had also made him a saint. The story of Padre Pio's vision spread slowly, whispered among friars and pilgrims who came to San Giovanni Rotondo. But even those who heard it second-hand felt its weight. The Saint Neve used it to frighten, only to awaken. The eyes of the soul, he said, must see what the body forgets. He did not describe flames, chains, or monsters. He described absence, the horror of living eternally without love. That vision taught him that the greatest miracle is not healing the body, but saving the soul. And for that he was willing to bleed. He once told a confessor that the souls in hell do not curse God because he condemned them, but because they finally see that they condemned themselves. In that instant, he said, they remember every grace refused. For Padre Pio, this memory was the essence of damnation, an eternal awareness of love rejected. It is not God who forgets them. He explained, it is they who chose to forget God. That single truth became the foundation of his preaching. Salvation is not about fear, but about memory, remembering who we belong to. He also spoke often of purgatory, the mercy of purification. The souls there suffer, he said, but they love their pain is hope. He believed that God created purgatory out of compassion, so that even imperfect souls could still reach him. If there were no purgatory, he said, few would be saved. After his vision, he begged the faithful to pray daily for the dead. Do not let love stop at the grave, he told them. It reaches further than death. To him, purgatory and hell were not opposites, but consequences, one chosen, one healed. As news of his sanctity spread, thousands came seeking miracles, but he never allowed fame to overshadow repentance. Miracles are the smallest works of God. He said, forgiveness is the greatest. He reminded pilgrims that the wounds in his hands were not badges of honor, but signs of intercession. These are not for me, he told them. They are for you. To him, the stigmata were reminders of the price of every confession that Christ had already paid the debt, but men must still accept it. Padre Pio also feared that modern man would lose the sense of sin. When sin becomes opinion, he said, the devil has won. He lamented how confessionals were emptying even in his lifetime. They will call good evil and evil good, he warned, echoing the prophet Isaiah. But his message was not despair. It was hope. The mercy of God, he said, is an ocean that waits for one drop of repentance. Was the heart of his mission. To awaken repentance, not terror. To call sinners to mercy, not to madness. His vision also shaped his understanding of the priesthood. A priest, he said, is a living bridge between heaven and hell. He believed that a confessor's duty was not to judge, but to rescue. When I sit in the confessional, he explained, I am not a man. I am the wounded hand of Christ, reaching for the drowning. For him, every confession was a battle fought with the invisible. The more he absolved, the more he suffered, not from sin's filth, but from love's fire. One friar once asked him, Padre, after seeing such horror, how can you still believe in hope? He answered, because I have seen mercy deeper than hell. He described how even as the soul fell, he felt that God's love pursued it, not with vengeance, but with longing. If that soul had turned, even then, he said, it would have been saved. That single possibility, that grace never stops calling, sustained him through every dark night. His hope was not naive. Was forged in vision, tested in pain, proven in faith. In his final years when his body was failing, Padre. Pio often repeated the words that had defined his life: pray, hope, and don't worry. Many misunderstood it as optimism, but behind that phrase was the memory of his vision. He did not mean everything will be fine. He meant trust God even when you see the abyss. For him, prayer was the rope, hope, the light and trust, the step that keeps a soul from falling. God's justice, he said, is love wounded, not love absent. The last time he spoke of that night was to a young friar who had asked him if hell was real. Pio looked at him silently for a long moment, then said, "More real than this floor and colder than you can imagine." He placed his hand on the friar's head and added, "Softly, but so is mercy. Never forget which one calls you." That was his final teaching. Not fear, but remembrance. The vision that once broke him had become his homily to the world. Sin is real, hell is real, but so is redemption. As we close this story, remember what Padre Pio said: "If men could see what I have seen, they would never sin again." Let those words echo in your heart tonight. Sin is not freedom, it is exile. Confession is not shame, it is return. Mercy is not weakness, it is victory. God waits even now not to condemn, but to forgive. Go to confession, pray for the dying, offer reparation for those who refuse grace. And if this story has moved your soul, subscribe and walk with us as we uncover more truths that heaven revealed through its saints. For Padre Pio's warning is not to terrify, but to save. And it still speaks even now through the divine echo.